This is Land of Havilah, 1 Chronicles 12. This is an accounting of some of the men who supported David. To get oriented to David's life, we'll need to remember some of the major phases. He was a shepherd boy at first, then a military commander under Saul, then a fugitive from Saul, then king of Judah, then king of all Israel. All the time he was a fugitive from Saul, various Israelites were joining him until he was commanding a small army of them. They hid from Saul in the wilderness areas of Judah, including caves, forests, and deserts. And when that wasn't feasible anymore, they moved to Philistia, first to Gath, then to Ziklag, where they had a fairly stable existence until Saul died. During the Ziklag years, verse 1, "Now these are those who came to David to Ziklag while he was a fugitive from Saul the son of Kish. They were among the mighty men, his helpers in war. They were armed with bows and could use both the right hand and the left in slinging stones and in shooting arrows from the bow." Comment: Ziklag had desert to the south and Judah just to the east. We couldn't say life was stable in Ziklag, but it was at least good enough that David and his men were able to bring their households to join them. 1 Samuel 27:3 and 1 Samuel 30, verse 3. They supported themselves by making raids on the desert peoples to the south. 1 Samuel 27:8. Now those from the tribe of Benjamin who lived with David at Ziklag, still in verse 2. They were of Saul's relatives of the tribe of Benjamin. The chief was Ahiezer, then Joash, the sons of Shemaah the Gibeathite, Jeziel and Pelet, the sons of Azmaveth, Berakah, Jehu the Anathothite, Ismaiah the Gibeonite, a mighty man among the 30 and a leader of the 30, Jeremiah, Jahaziel, Johanan, Jozabad the Gederathite, Eluzai, Jeremoth, Bealiah, Shemariah, Shephatiah the Haruphite, Elkanah, Ishiah, Azarel, Joezer, and Jashobeam the Korahites, and Jolah and Zebediah the sons of Jehoram of Gedor. Comment: in verse 2, these men were Saul's distant relatives because they were Benjamites like Saul. Naturally, Saul's own tribe tended to support him, but the men listed here, though they were Benjamites like Saul, came over to David. They had vision and bravery to know what to do and to get up and do it. Now coming Gad was a tribe of Israel on the other side of the Jordan River. They defected from Saul's kingdom to David when he was at the stronghold in the wilderness, which is the cave of Adullam. Verse 8. Some Gadites joined David in the stronghold in the wilderness, mighty men of valor, men trained for war who could handle shield and spear, whose faces were like the faces of lions, and they were as swift as the gazelles on the mountains. Ezer the chief, Obadiah the second, Eliab the third, Mishmannah the fourth, Jeremiah the fifth, Attai the sixth, Eliel the seventh, Johanan the eighth, Elzabad the ninth, Jeremiah the 10th, and Machbanai the 11th. These of the sons of Gad were captains of the army. He who was least was equal to 100, and the greatest to 1,000. These are those who went over the Jordan in the first month, when it had overflowed all its banks, and they put to flight all who lived in the valleys, both toward the east and toward the west. Comment: those were the Gadites who came over to David when he was in the wilderness. In verse 8, they were like lions for war and like gazelles for running. In verse 14, one of them was worth 100 or 1,000 ordinary troops who are apt to turn and run. In verse 15, a conflict we don't have much information on. The Gadites proved themselves by crossing the Jordan River when the water was high and attacking an enemy in the valley, scattering them east to west. Who the enemy was, it's not said. Now coming a group of 30 Benjamites and Judahites who came to David at Adullam. When they first arrived, David didn't know their intentions. Verse 16. Some of the children of Benjamin and Judah came to the stronghold to David. David went out to meet them and answered them, "If you've come peaceably to me to help me, my heart will be united with you. But if you've come to betray me to my adversaries, since there's no wrong in my hands, may the God of our fathers see this and rebuke it." Comment: David said, "If you've come to join me, wonderful. But if you've come to turn me over to Saul, may God rebuke you." Coming up, one of them gave David an inspired answer. Verse 18. Then the Spirit came on Amasai, who was chief of the 30, and he said, "We are yours, David, and on your side, you son of Jesse. Peace, peace be to you, and peace be to your helpers, for your God helps you." Then David received them and made them captains of the band. Comment: history proved Amasai's declaration of loyalty to be a smart one, because he was speaking according to the will of God. God was indeed helping David. We want to be on whatever side God is on. Why be found opposing God? The event coming up happened as follows. The army of Israel was lining up against the Philistine army in the plain of Jezreel. This would be the battle in which Saul was killed. In the run-up to the battle, David and his men were lining up to support the Philistines, and before the battle began, some of the men of the tribe of Manasseh came over from Saul's army and defected to David. Verse 19. Some of Manasseh also joined David when he came with the Philistines against Saul to battle, but they didn't help them, for the lords of the Philistines sent him away after consultation, saying, "He'll desert to his master Saul to the jeopardy of our heads." As he went to Ziklag, some from Manasseh joined him: Adnah, Jozabad, Jediel, Michael, Jozabad, Elihu, and Zelethi, captains of thousands who were of Manasseh. They helped David against the band of rovers, for they were all mighty men of valor and were captains in the army. Comment in verse 19, the Philistines didn't trust David and his Israelite men, so they sent them away before the battle started. Meanwhile, in verse 20, naturally, the Manassites who had just defected to David left the battlefield with him. It was a 3-day trip from there back to Ziklag, 1 Samuel 30, verse 1. In verse 21, when they arrived in Ziklag, it had been raided and burned. All their wives and children were missing, taken captive. The Manassites went with David and his men in pursuit of the raiders, caught up with them, and retrieved everything, 1 Samuel 30, verse 19. In all the time David was on the run from Saul in Judah and in exile in Philistia, verse 22, from day to day men came to David to help him until there was a great army, like God's army. Comment, that was the end of the account of the men who joined David when he was on the run. Besides being brave and visionary enough to know who the true king was, there were some other factors driving them to David. Quote, everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered themselves to David, 1 Samuel 22:2. The entire story of David's exile and the men who joined him is a foreshadowing of Christ and his followers. Jesus was persecuted like David and rejected in Israel like David, but a few of us know who the true king is, that being Jesus, and we've gone over to him already. We have the vision, bravery, and determination to do it. We make ourselves strangers and aliens in this world, professing our loyalty to our true king, following him in all his causes and battles, having joined our hearts to him. When he comes into his kingdom, as David came into his, he'll bring us with him. The Spirit of God put pressure on us to go over to Christ by making us feel distressed, in debt, or discontented in some way, as were the men who went over to David. The thief on the cross told Jesus, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." When Jesus comes fully into his kingdom, he'll remember us. We have the proven character, loyalty, and vision of the Holy Spirit. We threw our lot in with Jesus before it was obvious to everyone else that he is king. Coming next, after David had been king for a while, but only over Judah, representatives from all Israel came to him, verse 23. These are the numbers of the heads of those who were armed for war, who came to David to Hebron to turn the kingdom of Saul to him, according to Yahweh's word. The children of Judah who bore shield and spear were 6,800 armed for war. Of the children of Simeon, mighty men of valor for the war, 7,100. Of the children of Levi, 4,600. Jehoiada was the leader of the household of Aaron, and with him were 3,700. And Zadok, a young man mighty of valor, and of his father's house, 22 captains. Of the children of Benjamin, Saul's relatives, 3,000. For until then the greatest part of them had kept their allegiance to Saul's house. Comment, a few Benjamites came to David while he was in exile, but the majority of them remained loyal to Saul, and after him his son Ishbosheth, because they were all Benjamites. But when Ishbosheth was assassinated, they came to Hebron with the rest of Israel to pledge their loyalty to David. Of the other tribes who came to enthrone David over all Israel, verse 30. Of the children of Ephraim, 20,800, mighty men of valor, famous men in their fathers' houses. Of the half-tribe of Manasseh, 18,000, who were mentioned by name to come and make David king. Of the children of Issachar, Men who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do, their heads were 200, and all their brothers were at their command. Comment: This is the famous verse of the sons of Issachar who understood the times. They understood it was time to make David king. You and I ought to understand God's choice when we go to the voting booth. It comes down to the brass tacks of knowing how we should cast our vote, according to God. We ought to have God's viewpoint on the issues of the day. Verse 33. Of Zebulun, such as were able to go out in the army, who could set the battle in array with all kinds of instruments of war, 50,000, and who could command and were not of double heart. Of Naphtali, 1,000 captains, and with them shield and spear 37,000. Of the Danites, who could set the battle in array, 28,600. Of Asher, such as were able to go out in the army, who could set the battle for array, 40,000. On the other side of the Jordan, of the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, with all kinds of instruments of war for the battle, 120,000. All these were men of war who could order the battle array and came with a perfect heart to Hebron to make David king over all Israel. And all the rest also of Israel were of one heart to make David king. They were there with David 3 days, eating and drinking, for their brothers had supplied provisions for them. Moreover, those who were near to them, as far as Issachar, Zebulun, and Naphtali, brought bread on donkeys, on camels, on mules, and on oxen, supplies of flour, cakes of figs, clusters of raisins, wine, oil, cattle, and sheep in abundance, for there was joy in Israel. Comment: That was 348,000 men from all over Israel, all of them fit for war, who traveled to Hebron to declare David king, weapons in hand as a show of support. They brought food and wine for feasting and celebration. In verse 40, there was joy in Israel. Sounds like the marriage supper of the Lamb. The number from Issachar was a disappointing 200, compared to the next most disappointing, which was Benjamin at 3,000. So the sons of Issachar who understood the times were the few who did. We want to be like the few who understand and not like the many who are clueless and stay home. Can we imagine having the opportunity of going to David's coronation and not going? Let's take a stand on modern issues. 1 Chronicles 13 is next.